with Dr. Rajesh Kunar. I've heard him many times giving presentation, and I've learned a lot from Professor Dr. Rajesh Kunar. So I'm very honored to be here. So my presentation is on the fundamentals of research methods and methodology. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So this is the outline of the presentation, some general writing tips, why we do research, some different research outlines, the selection of topics, the different research designs, data collection methods, and validity and reliability in both qualitative and quantitative methods. Now, just preliminary on some tips. In the past, we are used to using big words, and the more people don't understand us, we think the better our writing is. But times have changed. One book written for the Queen's Office for the United Kingdom, it's called The Plain Word, Complete Plain Word, was reproduced again and again, and is even now a textbook for bureaucrats in the United Kingdom. It is requiring people to write as simply as possible, even if you have a very difficult concept you want to share. Ernest Hemingway won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and many learn how to write as simply as possible. The fewer words in a sentence, the better. The same with George Orwell. He said the purpose of writing is to communicate. If we write and nobody understands, then we fail in our writing. And in the US, across the Atlantic, the one textbook which is required for college students is The Elements of Style. It is so thin, it even shows that the author is practicing what he preaches. The same with the Complete Plain Word. And every time we use a big word, immediately the next sentence should define it. That's what we were taught when I was doing my doctorate in the US and my 2 master's degree. And Richard Feynman won the Nobel Prize in Physics. There's such a thing as a Feynman technique, which says, even if he's an expert in quantum physics, he's the first one who talked about quantum physics. He said, you should be able to explain a very difficult concept to a child. If you can't, you don't really understand what you're saying. So the simpler we explain to people, the better we understand. That proves that we know what we're talking about. And parsimony is, Einstein is saying, there are many factors affecting everything, but we should only look at certain things. And research is not writing a whole encyclopedia. We're writing one thing. So we're being parsimonious. We're only looking at a few elements. Perhaps 2 elements would be sufficient, and subsets of the 2 elements. And William Perry was a professor at Harvard University. He conducted studies on all undergraduate students, freshman year, sophomore, junior, and senior. He found out the more immature a student is, freshman year, the more they think there are only 2 choices in the world, either true or false or right or wrong. But when the student becomes more advanced, going to the second year as a sophomore, they realize there are different possible answers. And then when they become junior, they realize maybe things are relative depending on what we see and where we sit. For instance, a citizen would see something different from what a politician would see, because they are on 2 different points of view. And the highest level is, we know there are many different answers, but we're committed to one position. For example, what Professor Rajesh Kunar said, no discrimination on caste, class, that is a commitment, gender and education and so on and so forth. So we reach that higher level if we are committed to some positionality. And Bloom's taxonomy is often used in many universities to say, do our students really know what they learn in school? The lowest level is remembering, memorizing. The teacher says, this is a variable, they just throw the word back, variable. And maybe higher level, they understand. So they look at the dictionary, oh, a variable means this and that. But even higher level is to apply the knowledge into practice. For example, they would do a homework. Okay, tell us what is the independent variable. Make an example of what is the dependent variable. And then higher level is to analyze the real world and look at what are the variables out there in society. And evaluate will look at the weaknesses, the strength, opportunities. And then the highest level is we create new knowledge. In fact, when we do research, the assumption is we are creating new knowledge. We should go beyond remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating. We are expected to create new knowledge. And then what is research? Research is tons of different things, among which are to explore a topic or a problem, to investigate, look for facts, to look for things that we have never understood. For instance, Mars, we want to know what Mars looks like. Systematic, we have a certain systematic ways by which we study a given phenomenon. And then we want to acquire new knowledge, to understand and make sense out of what's going on in the world, material world, physical world, biological world, chemical world, engineering world, and to discover new insights. But we must be evidence-based. In fact, this is a very important need now at the United Nations. Everything that we do must be evidence-based. And then to advance new knowledge, as well as to solve social and problems, as well as scientific problems. So why do we conduct research? Sometimes we want to innovate, have new products. So in the past, we have fire, and then we have coal, and then we have electricity, and then now we have geothermal, we have solar. So we want to advance and to progress and to develop new knowledge, acquire new knowledge. For example, now we have artificial intelligence. Things are moving very fast. So fast that AI is even more intelligent than individual human beings now. And even the creators of AI are now saying we should regulate them. They're even giving testimonies to the US Congress to say we need policies now to regulate AI. And we want to solve problems in society, like do we have enough energy? Is there war? Is there caste discrimination? All of these things we want to solve. And we cannot make decisions without evidence. So decision-making must be evidence-based. And we want to have an impact, change for the betterment of society and to grow, and sometimes to explore. We want to find out the limits of human knowledge and capacity to make new inventions. One important requirement in doing research is replicability. It's a requirement according to which our research must be replicated by other people. That's why our data sets must be made public and available to everyone. But the problem is, there's a big meta study of all research in the world, and they realize that nobody is doing replication. So in theory, our research must be so robust that anyone who has our data set must be able to replicate and come up with the same conclusion. That's the dream. But the reality is no one is doing replication of research. Then general outlines of papers are very different for qualitative, quantitative, and just document search for papers. In qualitative paper, The vocabulary would be introduction, literature review, methodology, findings, and conclusion. However, the vocabulary for quantitative research is different. They have introduction and including literature review within the introduction, and then methodology, and instead of findings, it's results. Why results? It's results of statistical tests, results of laboratory tests. We don't use the word results in qualitative because we're not doing any tests. Laboratory in qualitative research. We're observing, but not testing. And then conclusion is the word for qualitative. In quantitative, in general, it's discussion, but some would also have a section called conclusion. But in some qualitative papers, the findings have analysis and discussion, a subset, and then the conclusion. So it's a little flexible. But for papers which do not do any original search for documents or testing or observation or field work, it's basically an academic paper based on library search. The outline would be in general, introduction, and then how you would go about to do your literature search, and then the actual literature, and then you evaluate the literature, and you come up with a synthesis, putting things together, and conclusion. Now, is the research outline rigid or is it flexible? In quantitative research, it is rigid. You are guided by your hypothesis. If you say, for example, sulfuric acid, when added to water, will explode, then you should stick to your hypothesis. But in qualitative research, things change in the field. And the questions we want to ask might not be asked because of political sensitivity. Then we can go back and rephrase our research questions and then our purpose of our study. But for quantitative, it's rigid. But what you promise, you should do. But in qualitative, things change. So it's acceptable that we could make some changes along the way. And so for the desk-based academic paper, meaning you don't go out for interview, you don't go for focus group discussion, you don't do lab tests, and so on. So you have the introduction, the general background, and then you have the literature search, explaining how you would do it. I'll give an example later of the requirements of how to do their literature search. And then the actual literature. There are many ways by which we can organize this. The first way is by themes. We find like there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 themes. And the way we write is thematic, or it could be chronological. Some ideas have changed over time. For example, we can say the idea of teaching in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to 2000, 210, 220 have changed. So we can do a chronological way of discussing the literature. These are a few simple ways of doing things. But we have to identify major themes, theories, or concepts. A bad way of writing literature often being done is author A said, author B said, author C said. That is rejected. That's not acceptable. That is a bad way of writing because you're just throwing back what people have said. In fact, I am an anonymous peer reviewer for an American journal, and one paper just said Ayurveda medicine means this, and then Ayurveda medicine means that, and Ayurveda means this. They're almost the same, but from 3 different sources. Nothing new. It's basically just one definition. So we rejected the literature review, saying, if you want your paper to be accepted, you should give an acceptable literature review, not 3 definitions or 4, which are almost identical. You have not identified differences, similarities, or changes through time. So remember that. Bad way of writing is just throwing author A, author B, author C. You must organize the ideas. For example, you can say that education from the 1940s to the year 2020 have evolved from teacher-centered to student-centered to computer-centered. Those are the three major themes. And then discuss everything within the three major themes. Not one by one without looking at the unity and the differences among the different exposition of the different authors. And critical evaluation, now you would discuss about, are there problems in the literature, or did an author just give a sweeping statement without evidence? So you have to give your critical view. In the synthesis, you come up with a big picture when you write your literature-based paper by saying, for example, there are three trends in education: teacher-centered, student-centered, and now computer-centered. And the next generation, that is your view, is perhaps it will be AI-centered. It could be in mobile phone, it could be in tablet, it could be television, anywhere else you can use AI, or even in the car. So you are looking at certain big trends. That is the role of when you write a paper, showing all the different trends. Now, then you have, in anthropology, it's very different. I have two professors. I took some electives because I can take a lot of courses, part of my tuition for free. And they were involved in what is called the thick description. They don't have introduction, they don't have literature review, they don't have methodology. They just describe directly. And this is Scopus, because their tradition in writing is very different. Example, one professor of mine, she's a European American, she's a white American female. She went to Cambodia for field research to study the antiquities. And she drove a truck to the village, and everyone was looking at her, and that was the Scopus anthropology paper. She, as the main subject, driving a truck into a village in Cambodia, everyone was shocked to see a woman driving a truck. That was it. It's not right or wrong. It's the tradition in anthropology for them to do it that way. Another professor, when she applied for a job, because at my university in the US, the tradition was the professors who are competing for a job have to do public lecture. So she's a white European American professor too, white woman. And she went to Indonesia to study, I'm not sure where, in one island, in one village. She said in that village, the people have to offer a buffalo when they get married to the spouse's family. But the family was so poor that they only have a chick, and the chick represented the buffalo. And that was it. That was her paper. So it was thick description, going deep into how people practice. Maybe it was Toraja or somewhere, I forgot. But that was an acceptable paper in anthropology. So we cannot force them to write in a certain way because that's not the tradition in anthropology. And in fact, one student of ours here in Thailand submitted a paper for publication in a Scopus paper. They rejected the paper because it had all of the introduction, statement of the problem, all of it. They don't want those in methodology in an anthropology journal. So we learned that there are many different ways by which we should write, and we should learn from there. So this is what I'm trying to say. Each faculty member has different training. For example, where I come from, one professor studied in the US, another studied in the Netherlands, another studied in Indonesia, and then another studied in another country in Europe. So all of them have different trainings in writing and in dissertation and in publication. And each department has its own sets of rules. In each field, for example, in political science, even if it's qualitative, they use the word hypothesis. But in other fields like sociology, anthropology, they do not use the word hypothesis if it's qualitative. And each college, each university, like our university, we have our own rules of what they expect to see in a dissertation. This is the American vocabulary for doctorate. I think in the UK it's thesis, and it's the other way around in the US and in the UK. And each journal has its own tradition of what they expect to see in your paper. And each conference paper has different author guidelines. So the rule is stick with their rule because you are submitting to them, right? They decide whether your paper is acceptable or not. So you have to follow their rules in writing. And avoid plagiarism. Many times people are just careless and people get caught. We had one student, not here, in another country, who was an instructor, who was investigated for the dissertation, doctoral work, for one sentence, because the professor caught one sentence was exactly copied from a book. A big formal official investigation was conducted. So be careful. And in another university in the US, the external committee member came and said the first paragraph alone was copied from a book or a journal, and the student failed. So be very careful. 3 ways by which you can avoid plagiarism would be put in quotation mark, or paraphrase, write it in a different way, or précis. Précis is a summary. You summarize the idea, let's say, of one paragraph into 1 or 2 sentences. 3 different ways by which you can avoid plagiarism. And now there are many AI plagiarism checkers. Even journals would say your paper is 30% plagiarism, and many journals will only accept up to 20%. That's even very kind of them. Okay, so be careful with plagiarism, or else your paper will not be accepted. Or if your students are in your university, where I came from, my university, depending on the professor, sometimes you fail the whole class, sometimes you are kicked out of the department, sometimes you're kicked out of the college, and sometimes you're kicked out of the university. Depends. Each department is different. And we had some students in computer science did exactly the same programming. There was a big investigation who did what. They interviewed each person, and they found out who were copying somebody else's answers, and they were kicked out. So it happens not only in the soft sciences, social science, it also happens in the hard sciences, including programming in computer science, when students copy each other's answers. The professors know, and there will be investigation. So avoid. Even programming, you can rewrite the program in different ways, longer, shorter, shortcut, and that will be safer. Steps. When you write a paper, first, look for a topic which sparks your interest. And then preliminarily read about it. And then you get some ideas. And then you find some problem that has to be solved. And then you develop some research questions and develop research purpose. Sometimes it's the other way around. I see different journals. Some journals start with research questions. Others start with the purpose of the study. By the way, I've attended many US conferences with professors, and there were workshops for graduate students. And we were told, and there was a big study, meta study. They say that in qualitative studies, the word should be purpose of the study, not objective. Only in quantitative research should you use the word objective. They have reason behind it. It's not just simple, we want this word. There's logic and rhyme and reason behind it. You can do research on this. They do like thousands and thousands of papers and say majority of which have written the qualitative paper correctly as purpose of the study. But other journals insist that you use the word objective even if it's qualitative. Again, my rule of thumb, follow their rule because they're the ones who are accepting your paper or rejecting your paper, right? And then look for the proper methodology for your paper, and then issues of ethics. For example, if you're dealing with vulnerable groups like refugees, internally displaced people, war, armed conflict, coup d'etat, those are highly sensitive, or traffic people, migrant workers. You don't just do research. You have to get permission to make sure the people you interview or from whom you get data are protected and no harm is done to them. And there are procedures depending on different institutions. There are institutional review board, for example, consent form, and so on. And then come up with your timeline. How long do you expect to finish your research, do your research? How to select a topic? Of course, you should love the topic. If you don't, you will suffer while you're working on your doctorate or your student's doctorate or master's degree. Because if you don't like it, there was force on you, then it's not your work. You don't have ownership. You should love what you're doing. But in situations in which you need funding, you should also match your interest with the institution. For example, you want to do research on nanomaterial, okay, in mechanical engineering. But then the mechanical engineering is faculty and professors have funding for robotics. It's not a match because they have money to fund students to work as researchers or to be graduate students in robotics. But you want to do nano material. It's not a match at all. So you have to look for match of what you want and what funding is available. So you should know what to do with this. And then it should be relevant to your field. If your field is mechanical engineering and you want to do research in astrophysics, again, that's not related, then maybe they'll say, what's your expertise, what's your background? Then maybe they will not give you the admission and so on. And it should be researchable. You don't want to say, I want to prove that Pluto has water. It's like maybe not a planet anymore. It had been demoted and it's too far away. Do you have funding to do research if there is water in Pluto? If it's not researchable, forget it, okay? And then research first. Find out what's out there. It should not be too broad. Like, I want to save the world. Like, that's too much. You're not a messiah or something else like that. You're just a human being doing one research. And if it's not original, then they would say, why bother do research? Because there's nothing new. You should develop some new idea by filling a gap and solving one puzzle. It should be doable and politically sensitive. If you want to study, let's say, about, I don't know what, the coup d'etat in one country or military intervention by one country, and you know the risk of you being killed is high, maybe avoid doing that type of research, okay? Because you should care for your life to begin with. And very importantly, for our students here at the PhD level, I say, wonderful, you're doing research in Nagaland about this and this little group. I say, who cares? You have to make the whole world care if you want your paper to be published. I say, your research is really wonderful. You're looking at a small group of people in Nagaland doing something wonderful. I say, tie it up to a bigger picture. For example, you can talk about indigenous people in the world have undergone some kind of discrimination, and then tie it up. And Nagaland has indigenous people in there. So it's now relevant to the whole world. Tie it up. And then I had another student, she is an American, and she studied African American graveyard. She's an American. African American graveyards in New York in historical times. I say it's a wonderful project, but who cares? You have to tie it up to a bigger picture. For example, discrimination, marginalization, invisibility of minorities. Then, they would see the linkage to your research. Page limits. Many, let's say, conferences require 6 pages maximum, for example, for conference proceedings. If you do 7 pages, they will reject your paper because they mean it when they say 6 pages. The same with journal articles. If they say 20 and you have 25, they will throw it back to you. Okay, it's a reality. And if they say 20 and you only have 15, they will still give it back to you. They say it's a wonderful paper, but we told you, author guideline, 20 pages. So you have to follow their rule, not your rule, because we want to be published, right? And then there should be no problem in data collection. So those are some guidelines. And you're not writing an encyclopedia. You are writing one paper. So be specific. That's a problem with many of our PhD students here. They want to solve the world's problems. We say, maybe you can do one paper at a time. Now, in your whole lifetime, that's your whole agenda for your whole life, not for your doctoral paper. Okay, so try to be realistic, specific, measurable, appropriate, relevant, time-bound. It's the same in business, in planning, and also in writing research, okay? In management, everything must be doable. Okay. And then to make a title, this is just one suggestion. It's not the only way of doing a title. Main topic, what are you writing about? Then are you looking at the role, or are you looking at relationship, correlation, or causation? And what is it that you're studying, the population? And in what given context? And what field? And what time frame? Because you're not studying, let's say, child labor forever, from the primitive times to now. No, you're not. Maybe you're looking at child labor in Pakistan, in Islamabad, who are bonded labor, working in making bricks during the time before Imran Khan, something like that. So it should be limited. An example, this is an example. The title is self-explanatory. The impact of instructor job satisfaction on student performance in advanced calculus on Mars, to make it very hypothetical, from 2023 to 2024. So you have what kind of relationship, impact, and what is the cause, the effect, the unit of analysis, the field of study, the geography, and the time element. This is one way of writing the title. So it's crystal clear from the beginning. Abstract, it's not write anything. Abstract is not an introduction. It is the soul. It's the soul of your paper. It's the most irreducible minimum of your paper. One sentence part, what is the problem? And one sentence, what is the purpose or the what research question? One sentence, what is the literature that guides your paper? One sentence, your methods. One sentence, your findings. One sentence, your conclusion. And 5 key terms max. That's it. It's very clear. Some journals even do it this way. The abstract is written this way. Some scientific journal articles. To make it clear, there's no magical thinking. Everything is crystal clear. Okay, types of research. The way of writing will be different. You have basic research, applied research, exploratory, will go deeper, descriptive, correlational, explanatory, qualitative, quantitative, inductive, deductive, primary, and secondary research. Okay, descriptive, you're giving facts and figures. Exploratory, something you don't know. So you will find out by asking people, going out. And then relational, is there a relationship between height and intelligence? Then you do surveys. Causation, does eating more carbohydrates lead to obesity? So you're looking at a relationship. Most often than not, the quantitative are relational and causality. Most probably for qualitative, it's descriptive and exploratory when you do your research. For basic research, pure research, it's just ideas, basically, just from the books. What did Buddha say about interfaith dialogue? What are the teachings in Hinduism of samsara, or of artha, or dharma, or puja? And then in applied, you want to solve real world problems. Oftentimes applied are in medicine, nursing, and even biochemistry, pharmacy. You want to know what's going on, or even in public administration, public health. You want to solve real social problems. But action research is you as researcher and the people who are out there are co-producers of knowledge. It's applied, but you're not the one only developing the agenda of the research. You work with the practitioners, with the people in the community, with people out there. Sometimes this is, in general, the part of the introduction. Many times, people don't write the problem statement. It's a big problem if you don't. I'll give an example later. Rational, why are you doing this research? What's the point? The gap. In some paper, they want to see the aim. Aim is the bigger picture. Not the purpose of the study, but the bigger picture. Why are you doing this? I want to learn lessons. Okay, then that's about this and that. And then research question for qualitative study, but for quantitative research, it's hypothesis. Sometimes they also have research question. Again, as I said, in general, qualitative research uses a research question, not hypothesis. And then some have requirements for scope, limitation, delimitation. For qualitative paper, theories are optional. It depends on the faculty, the department, the college, many factors. But for quantitative, you're required to have a theory. And definition of terms depends also on the journal, your faculty, your professor, your college or university, your country. But for quantitative paper, they want to see both conceptual definition, which is the abstract definition from dictionary, and operation, like what are you really studying? Okay, for example, if you say you want to study the pH of water in a given place. Operationally, you would say, we want to study the acidity and alkalinity of the river water in this river from this time to that time. So it's very clear what you are studying. That's the operational definition. Okay, one problem, I have rejected a paper for publication in the US. I am an anonymous peer reviewer. One paper was done, very nice statistics and all, and then said, Ayurvedic medicine is used by men and women, young and old, for centuries. Excuse me. And it's a $19 billion industry. It is expected to rise to $23 billion industry. So I wrote, so there's no problem. Everyone uses Ayurveda, men, women, young and old, in all castes. And it's a thriving industry. So it's not worth writing a paper. Nothing is new, and there's no problem at all. So I said, if you want to save your paper, I did not outrightly reject. I said, if it's submitted as it is, it's rejected. However, you have a chance to revise and show to us you have identified a problem. I gave the author a chance. Tell us what is the problem you are trying to solve. And then the author did not come back. So it's not my fault. I even told the editor-in-chief, I'm sorry, this is how I look at it. There's no problem statement. There's no point. It's a thriving industry, the traditional medicine in India. And it's not only thriving, everyone uses it. So what's new? The author, he or she, should tell us something else. For example, but I'm not the author, export, so it will be even better for the Ayurvedic medicines for the whole world to know. But no, It was not done, so that's a problem. So many types of research gap in evidence, in methodology, methods, perspectives, theory, social, empirical gap, knowledge, and so on. Okay, so to identify good research gap, you have to be clear, specific, and then testable. You can see there's evidence relevant to the research topic, feasible, clearly defined, and stimulate critical thinking. Research questions, when you do it, it's like a funnel. You go from the big issue, then you go down to a very specific research question. And when new ideas emerge out of your research question. And sometimes you're required to do a scope limitation, delimitation. I'll skip these. Okay, for qualitative paper, you don't really need a theory, but sometimes you need a theory to help you understand, but it's not theory-led. Quantitative paper is a hypothetical deductive paper. You say A affects B. It's a theory-led. It does not mean you cannot use theory in qualitative. Again, qualitative paper is more flexible. There's room for changing. And in fact, a good qualitative paper produces new knowledge, grounded theory. You produce a middle range theory. Okay? Harvard Business School, known all over the world, published journal on case studies, no theories. They're focused on the importance of the practice. They don't care about generalizability. One case is enough. They want to see why does Nike sell the shoes at $250 when it only costs $9 to produce, for example. And how can they make that profit? One example is good enough for Harvard to produce. Okay, these are some theories. Okay. One problem with theories is instructors sometimes tell students to use the theories they used 20 years ago when they were students doing their doctorate. But sometimes the students imitate their professor's theory. So there's no new knowledge. I've seen that in conferences, after conferences. The same professor brings students to the conference, and they use the same theory. So no new insights are developed. Many things can be explored. I'll skip the variables and all due to time. Okay. Okay, for literature review, the general outline will be look at the previous studies and learn from it. What are the concepts they use, the theories they use, if any, methodology, and then what is the current state of knowledge about the matter. Sometimes those papers say this is the agenda for further research. That is the gap in their paper. You don't even have to think. Sometimes for gap, the previous papers have already identified the gap. Where they end is where you begin, if you wish so. If that's a good beginning for you, you say, I'm continuing the research of XYZ, and I found out that the ending is a good start for me. There are all kinds of literature review. The problem is certain journals or professors expect one way of writing, but you're writing it in another way. Solution, again, we are at the mercy of the journal. We are at the mercy of the department, of the faculty, of the college. Do what they want. If I insist I'm right in a journal, then I will not be, my paper will not be accepted. It happened to me. I didn't argue. I say, okay, I know what they're doing. They're using the traditional literature review writing, but I'm doing the systematic review writing. It's totally different. That calls for another session. We don't have time for that. Oh, okay, so all the different types of literature review. So always give the context of your paper and identify the seminal work, meaning who started that idea. For example, class struggle. You have to go back to Karl Marx, okay? And then go to the present day. Who's talking about class struggle? Maybe Bernie Sanders in the US, and maybe Vijay Prasad, maybe in India, yeah, maybe, and so on. And then what information already exists in the field today? And then identify the main ideas that they already have. That's where you come in. and know who are working on the same field that you are, because their writing will guide you in your writing and show the relationship of past writings to your writing. Or else they would say you just invented a gap. There's no real gap. You have to prove there is a gap. Okay? So your writing must be based on what have been done and what have not been done, and that's where you come in. Okay. This is an example of a systematic review, lit review. And number one, you say, I'm looking for a topic. Let's say it will be in business management or human resources. And I did research in EBSCO, 20 literature, Eric searched 20, JSOR 270, PubMed 23, Web of Science I found 16, and manual search I found 5, total of 370. And I removed the duplicates. Sometimes they appear in EBSCO, Eric, and PubMed, the same article. And unique articles, therefore, is 342. And I reject many irrelevant materials which I don't need for my paper. So there are candidate 95 abstract, and then the papers which are rejected because they don't have randomized control trials, which is maybe what you want, 74. So the total candidate studies is 21 at the end of the day. And then you, after reading the 21, you rejected 4 full text articles, and you only actually use 17. And then articles published in the same study 6, and you found out there are only 11. This is systematic review of literature. You tell the whole story of what you did, and then you narrow down to 11. You don't just, the traditional, just you choose. So it's not scientific. It's very whimsical based on what you want. But this one shows you did all due diligence to show beyond doubt these are the best 11 literature that you can use. Problem with methodology. Each author uses different vocabulary to mean the same thing. My advice to our PhD students, quote the author every time you use, because there will be someone else saying you're using the wrong vocabulary. And quote the author you're using, because each author has a different way of describing things. Methodology is the big picture of everything, the whole process. Methods are very specific, like data collection method, data analysis method. Methodology is everything under the sun. The same problem with theories. Many times instructors tell their students to use the theories they used when they were students 25 years ago. Or students on their own try to do what the professors do, which they did the research 30 years ago. Again, no new knowledge. So that's not good way by which you write your paper. Elements of methodology, the philosophy, the overall design, strategy. This is one set of vocabulary. Others would call this differently. The approach, research method, data collection method, sample size, data measurement, data analysis, validity, and reliability and ethics. So these are some vocabulary and all the different kinds of research. That will be for another session for other professors. This is another set of vocabulary by another author when they talk about what are the different elements of methodology. Again, we don't have time for that. Time is too short. This is an example of a paper that I wrote and how I use research methodology, the big picture. I'll show you how. Paradigm, sometimes known as the philosophy of research. What are your biases? What are the ways by which you look at the world? I use critical theory. So I'm not saying this is neutral. I'm saying there's a bias, let's say for women, for minorities, for ethnic groups, for religious minorities. So that's critical theory. So I have some positionality. The epistemology means how do I go about doing research? Am I theory-led or am I theory-generating? This one is, I start with the facts on the ground. not with the theory. Okay, and the research design that I use is a qualitative case study. I look at the given phenomenon, and there's a population, for example, of all minorities, but I trim it down to, let's say, the Muslim minority, and I trim it down to a given village, and I trim it down to a sampling. Oftentimes in qualitative, it's non-random. Therefore, it's not representative and it's not generalizable. And you should admit that. In quantitative, it's oftentimes randomized and it's generalizable, and it has external validity. And you have to say that. And the bigger the sample size, the bigger the population, the more representative your findings would be. A data collection method. This one is a qualitative paper. Field visits, public witness, different news and editorials, different points of views. And data analysis would be using narrative, thematic coding. I'll give you an example if we have time. Member check. One journal to which I submitted insisted that I don't just report what I saw. I have to go back to the people I've interviewed and stayed with in my participant observation and show them the draft of my paper. And I did. So when they told me to do that, the anonymous reviewers, I also told my students, go back to the textbook of Creswell on research method, read about member check, because some journals will ask you to do member check. So what my experiences are input for my students to help them avoid the same predicament that I was in when I was submitting a journal. It's published already, but I have to do that extra step. Time frame, I was talking about the present time. And output, meta theory, I came up with a big picture. I said there are 3 ways by which to look at this phenomenon. Okay, again, if you only think there's one way of looking at things, that is the most neophyte, the lowest level of ethical development and intellectual development. The higher level you go, the higher you achieve ethical development and moral development, according to William Perry, professor at Harvard. So I came up with a taxonomy. So I created new knowledge. Ethics, all of my participants were anonymous to protect them from harm. Okay, so this is an example of how I applied my research methodology. Okay, so this is the summary of that. And then philosophy of research, maybe we can skip this, might be too heavy. Okay, let me see. Okay, for qualitative research, you look at details, like how people look at, how do they feel. But in quantitative, you're looking at either correlation or causation. Again, for example, is there a relationship between hot indoors temperature in the room and noontime versus afternoon time? Is there a correlation? Causation is, if it's summertime, does it cause us to have more heat wave? So you're looking at that, but you don't do that in qualitative. Again, in qualitative research, it's more flexible. In quantitative, it's hypothetical deductive. You cannot break away from your promise. You're saying A affects B, you have to prove A affects B. Okay. And in theory, qualitative research, you are theory building. In quantitative research, you are theory utilizing. However, again, it does not mean you cannot use theory in qualitative. Some journals insist, try to use theory. We know you should not, but use it as a guide, just a general guide. Tools in qualitative research, we are the tools. I go out to research, I go out to interview. I am a tool. In quantitative, you have SPSS and so on. But in qualitative, you can use in vivo and so on, some other tools as well. And for qualitative, the sample is very small. Again, Harvard Business School, the world famous case study approach. One sample size is enough. You would want to say, why does Pepsi Cola sell less than Coca-Cola in the US? Or why does mango juice in India sell more than, I don't know what, lime juice in India? Okay, but in quantity, you look at the big picture. Does mango juice sell more in Gujarat, in Mumbai, Maharashtra, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Chennai, name it? So you big picture. And for qualitative research, analysis is narrative. You tell a story. In quantitative, it's statistical and analysis. Okay. Now, okay, there are more things you can look at. I don't want to overwhelm you. This is okay. Okay, philosophy, many times they're not written when we do research. But some professors, like I attended the ICNMR conference, one professor talked about the philosophy of research. We should make explicit, but most papers are not explicit. Are you using positivist, post-positivist, interpretivism, critical theory, or dialectical structuralism, for example? Most don't say that, but if you do, it's great. Some find it too much, too heavy. In theoretical lens, again, for qualitative, it can be implicit, but in quantitative, it should be explicit. You're testing the first law of thermodynamics, for example, or you're testing the quantum theory, a quantum physics theory of this and that. Okay, it has to be explicit. For time, you can do concurrent. That means I'm studying now at this given time all of the 191 participants in this international webinar. Concurrent at the same time, 191. Or sequential is I will look at the participants of the international webinar on April 2, April 7, May 7, May 21, and then May 26. So one is synchronic, the other is diachronic. One is at a given time, that's concurrent. And then data analysis simply means you break down each component in each part separately. And then data interpretation is you now make a story. Maybe I have an example for this. Quantitative research, you do survey, experiment, non-experiment, quasi-experiment. Qualitative research, these are some research design. Ethnography, you go to the field, live with the people, eat with the people. Phenomenology is very subjective. It's not wrong, it's one way of doing research. Positivist is very objective. Phenomenology is my meaning. This is maybe now a big issue in the US. A white woman would say, I feel like I'm an African American woman. It really happens. A professor said that. And then many men say, I feel I am a woman. That is their subjective feeling. And then in phenomenology, it's acceptable research. But then the objectivist people, like doing positivist research, no, objectively in biology, you are a man or you are a white woman. You're not African-American woman. You're not a woman, you are a man. So very different ways of doing research. Again, Harvard is the most famous for case study. One single firm is enough, or CEO to study. A narrative is the storytelling. You tell a story of what's going on, personal, social, community, or the whole history of a country. Many people do that. Even Stephen Hawking, one of the brightest minds on earth in physics, he had to write his own heavy physics into a popular book. He said, no, I want to write it myself. Many people have ghostwriters. So he explained event horizon, black hole in very simple terms in a story form. Nowadays, for people to understand, many hardcore hard scientists use storytelling but as a way by which to impart their knowledge. Okay, grounded theory is you create a new theory from your data. I think I gave a talk last year in December with Eudoxia on grounded theory. Maybe there's a video clip on that. And then action research. You and then the community are part of the research. Okay, so there are all kinds of research design. I'm looking at the time. And the data collection, quantitative would be surveys, experiments, observation, archival materials, maybe big data sets, and then psychophysiological measures, behavioral tests. Also, content analysis, in fact, is quantitative. You do measurement and counting. Social network analysis and census, national census. And then this is an example of a paper that I wrote. You tie everything up. The preparatory stage, this is chapter 1, the research problem, the purpose. And for quantitative, again, the literature review is embedded. It's not the literature of all other authors, but what are the latest findings? Let's say what medicine on COVID works and does not work. That for the biological sciences, they talk about the latest findings, okay? And then data collection, data analysis, and then conclusion. And then what is your output? Best practices, conclusion. So this, you can put together data collection and data analysis. Data collection, you do interview, for example, a document review. Data analysis, you break down into statistically frequency table. How many people said this and that. Thematic, you break down into themes. So, so there are different ways of doing data collection and qualitative and quantitative. And okay, mixed method, you use both. But there are many kinds of mixed method. You can do quantitative first, and from the quantitative, you do qualitative. But you are interpreting in that way, the quantitative. Or you can do sequential, first do qualitative and do quantitative. That's exploratory, okay? The heavier science is the explanatory. You have hard facts in numbers. Compared, you combine the two. And then there are other types. Triangulation means you try to use all kinds of methods. And it's a good way in research because you are looking at things from different angles to show that under any circumstance, your study is proven correct. To do data analysis, diagnostic, what's the problem? Cognitive, or what are the purpose? Findings, the descriptive, predictive. It's in the discussion of your paper, what could happen, especially if it's quantitative, and prescription, especially qualitative, you recommend certain things should be done, okay? For statistics, SPSS, for qualitative, text and vivo, we'll do that. This is one example of a manual qualitative data analysis form. You have interviews, you have transcribed them, or you have a text written by someone, you number them, and you put direct quotations. And then you come up with one keyword. Then maybe the keyword will be anger, exploited, discrimination, struggle. Then from those codes, you come up with a story. That you are now empowered to say, because of the exploitation of the minorities, they became angry, but that did not stop them from suffering. They struggled for change. So you create a story from what the direct quotations come from. Okay, so you need to have this. In some cases, the professors even journals, if it's quantitative, they want to see your data set. You must have this to prove you actually did a qualitative or quantitative review. Okay, so you find the concepts and you tie up the concepts, like the example I gave earlier. And then vocabulary for reliability and validity is for quantitative paper. Is the paper consistent, reproducible, and internally consistent? And for validity, is it accurate? Can it be applied to other instances? Is it the same internally from the title to your conclusion? Are you talking about the same variables? In qualitative paper, you use different vocabulary. It's the same thing, but the vocabulary is different. You have dependability, consistency, reliability is the term, and qualitativity is credibility, transferability, trustworthiness. So don't use, I was told when I went to see an editor-in-chief, Ray, you're mixing qualitative vocabulary with quantitative vocabulary. Your paper is qualitative, do not use quantitative vocabulary. So it made me conscious up to now to be careful in the use of words. Okay. And then for findings, there are basically three parts. You write your essay, the narrative, and then figures and tables. One journal, a few journals, in fact, I submitted, demand I should produce an original figure or table from my findings. Okay, so you should be able to, and I train my doctoral students to produce an original figure or table from your paper. And you are not allowed to copy and paste figures and tables from other books. Why? One, copyright. Two, it will take time for the authors to accept, to approve or disapprove, and the publisher. So one, it's copyright. Even if you say it's from this and that book and author, it's copyright without permission. So remove any external figures or table, create your own. People will cite you if you do that. Okay, so discussion, part of the paper, you respond to each research question, you support or reject and evaluate. Maybe you come up with new questions for further research. What is more important is you're not proving your point. Rather, you show that maybe your point was partly the truth or you were totally wrong. That's an excellent paper. If it's only linear, you're only proving what you already concluded to begin with, it's not a research paper. Surprises are good. If you show there are different answers, that's more powerful than saying, oh, I've proven that X affects B, that globalization is good. Not surprising, not good, not powerful. More powerful is say, well, globalization works maybe for the multinational corporation and local elite, something like that. But the poor and the middle class do not really benefit. That's more powerful than saying globalization is good, period. Okay, so more nuanced finding is better. Okay, so go back and compare with the past work. Are you able to defend the past work, or you have a new finding? And you should admit your paper is limitation, and then others can proceed from your paper. And three types of conclusion, depending on the type of paper you're writing. Qualitative paper, you summarize your findings, research question 1, research question 2, and so on. And then what are the implications? And address the limitations. And for quantitative paper, the vocabulary is results, which is equivalent to findings in qualitative paper. And then you have hypothesis, accept or fail to reject, etc., your hypothesis. And mixed paper would be to looking at both the quantitative and qualitative findings and address the overall picture. And this is another paper that I have summarized from the title to the keywords, to the research problem, to the research question, to the description of the findings, explanation of the findings, what I predict would happen, and what I prescribe should be done. So you can summarize your paper in one chart, and they demand that. That's another way of summarizing my paper. Okay, maybe I'll end here. We have an extra minute that Dr. Patricia gave me. These are some reasons for rejection. This is from a book by Rogi. One, your paper is not clear or relevant to your field, your department, or to the journal. You're writing about religion, but the journal is about, let's say, food. It doesn't match. And your paper only talks about a certain village in a certain small country, it's somewhere. They say, who cares? Again, tie it to a big theme, like minorities, invisibility, big theme that the world understands. And poorly written, nothing new is added, and is your paper just like a paraphrase of past paper, and your literature review is bad, and your data collected is questionable, and you poorly analyzed a paper, badly written, and you did not do what the reviewers told you to do, and your papers will be rejected. And I end here. And I prepared some evaluation rubrics to evaluate student papers and conference papers. Thank you. I'll share the evaluation rubric. You can download it. Thank you, Dr. Pratisha.